QuickFixesRealFast.com. We got a request to show you how to test oxygen sensors if you don't have a scanner or a lab scope. Now it can be done. We're going to show you several things. They're not as reliable as if you have a scanner or a lab scope, but in a pinch they will help. Now we're going to be using a one-wire oxygen sensor. On this one-wire oxygen sensor you've got one signal wire, and it grounds by actually being screwed into the exhaust. Now if you happen to have a 3 or 4 wire oxygen sensor, the testing is going to be the same. It's just that sensor will have a heater circuit and it'll have a ground wire. This one grounds just by hooking to the block. But the testing is going to actually be the same. Now what we're basically going to do is heat this up with propane. Now you know the oxygen sensor, once it gets up to 600 degrees, should start switching voltage. That's what we're going to do, is hook up a multimeter to the signal wire, heat this up, and see whether or not the oxygen sensor is actually working. Now you do not want to use acetylene for this test. It's way too hot. We're going to use propane. Now the propane actually has two purposes. It actually heats it up, but the flame also takes away the oxygen. When you put the flame over here, it takes away the oxygen. So it's going to have a double effect. Now we've basically taken an oxygen sensor, we've got it stuck inside vice grips. So the vice grips are grabbing the body of the oxygen sensor. We've got an alligator clip on it and one of our multimeter leads, so that's going to show us the ground, provide the ground. Then we have our other multimeter lead hooked up through a jumper wire to the signal wire. Now remember that the flame is actually going to heat it, and it's actually going to take away the oxygen that's surrounding it right now. Now if you watch your multimeter, point 1. If you look at your multimeter, you know it should fluctuate above and below half a volt, so that you can watch the digital input, and across the bottom you can see the bar graph as I apply heat to it. 0.9, take it away. 0.0, 0.1. 0.9, go back up. So we don't have a scanner on this or lab scope. We're just using the multimeter, an oxygen sensor, heat. Now you can see this is actually just a simple little bench test to tell you whether or not that oxygen sensor is actually working. Now propane does get hot enough that it could actually damage this, so you don't want it to get past glowing red hot. The shroud around that element is just thin metal, and it will heat up quickly, and you can see it turning red. So you just want to get it warmed up and apply the heat, and then keep backing it off. And then watch your oxygen sensor reading on the multimeter. Should go from around 0.1 up to 0.9. Should switch repeatedly above and below half a volt. This is where the bar graph really comes in handy, because you can see it actually working. So if you don't have a scanner or a lab scope, and in your diagnostics you're suspecting the oxygen sensor and you want to know whether or not it's actually working, you can actually bench test it like this, and it'll tell you whether or not that oxygen sensor is good or bad. Now if you were getting results to confirm a bad oxygen sensor, you would be applying the heat, looking at your multimeter, and it would not switch above and below half a volt, or it might be pegged high or pegged low. But if you understand the oxygen sensor should go above and below half a volt on a regular switching basis. Now the oxygen sensor is a very fast response. So when you apply the heat at first, you'll need to get a little bit of heat in there to get it up to its normal operating temperature. and then as you apply the heat and take away the heat, it should be almost an immediate response because the oxygen sensor does respond that fast. If you apply the heat and it takes a long time for that multimeter to show your response, take away the heat, and the same thing, a long response for that multimeter to react, then the oxygen sensor is very, very sluggish. It should be an almost immediate response between adding the heat and watching your multimeter.